There is a dinner that nobody inside that family has officially acknowledged, and nobody outside it has been able to fully piece together until now. A private gathering, a comment made across a table by a man who should have known better, and a reaction from William that stopped every conversation in that room in under 3 seconds. What Tom Parker Bowles said about Catherine that evening did not stay behind those walls the way it was supposed to, and the fallout from it has been quietly and methodically reshaping relationships inside that household ever since. The part that nobody has reported cleanly is not the comment itself. It is what William did next, and what Anne did the morning after, and what Camilla discovered about her own son when she tried to contain the damage and found out too late that the attempt to contain it had made every single part of it worse. Before we get to that dinner, you need to understand who Tom Parker Bowles actually is inside this world, because the version most people carry of him is the public one. The food writer, the charming columnist, the man who turns up on television tasting things and talking about them with the easy fluency of somebody who has never once had to worry about whether the restaurant bill is going to cause a problem. That version of him is real, as far as it goes, but it does not go very far into the room we are talking about. Tom Parker Bowles is Camilla's son from her first marriage to Andrew Parker Bowles. He was born in 1974, which means he grew up watching his mother navigate one of the most complicated and scrutinized positions any woman in this country has ever occupied. He watched her be the hidden woman for years. He watched the country turn on her when Diana died. He watched the rehabilitation, the slow, patient rebuilding of a public image across 2 decades, the coronation, the crown. And through all of it, he has been close to her in the way that a child who witnessed all of that tends to be: protective, loyal, and occasionally, as the people around him have noted over the years, prone to a particular kind of confidence that comes from knowing exactly which rooms you are allowed into, and he has been allowed into a great many of them. That is the part people underestimate about Tom. He is not simply Camilla's son in a distant ceremonial sense. He has been present at private family gatherings for years. He has sat at tables with Charles long before Charles was king. He has moved through the informal spaces of that world with a comfort that very few people outside the bloodline ever manage. And that comfort is important because it is the thing that makes what happened at that dinner not just a social mistake, but a signal. A man who knows those rooms and how they work said something he should not have said in one of them. And the question that sat over everything that followed was whether he said it by accident. Tom is not without affection inside that family in the wider sense. He and William have never been close in the way that real warmth produces, but they have been civil. They have shared rooms at the same occasions for years without incident. They have stood in the same photographs with the faces people arrange when the institution requires them to stand together, and that civility is the thing you have to hold in your head when you get to the comment. Because what was said at that dinner did not come from a stranger. It came from a man who had been in those rooms long enough to know exactly what the lines were and exactly where this particular one sat. Now let me take you to the dinner itself, because the setting matters, and the occasion matters, and the specific combination of people in that room matters in a way that becomes obvious the moment you understand what was said inside it. This was not a state occasion. It was not a formal banquet with a seating plan drawn up 6 months in advance by a household secretary who cross-references every placement against a list of known tensions. Those occasions have their own architecture of protection built into them. The formality itself is a kind of management. Everybody knows their position. Everybody knows the order of things, and the rigidity of the structure keeps the temperature in the room inside a range that nobody has to worry about. This was something smaller, and in some ways more dangerous precisely because of that. A private dinner of the kind the royal family holds periodically, where the distinction between family and institution blurs in ways that formal occasions never allow. The guest list was not long. Senior family members, a small number of people close to the household, and Tom. Present not in any official capacity, but in the capacity he has occupied for years, which is Camilla's son. A known face, a man with the right last name and the right history in those rooms to be there without anyone having to explain why. Catherine was there, and her presence at this particular dinner mattered in a way that is worth understanding before anything else, because Catherine's position inside this family has shifted considerably in the last 2 years. She is no longer simply the Princess of Wales in the ceremonial sense. The people who work closely with that household will tell you, if they trust you enough, that she has become something closer to a co-architect of the institution's future alongside William. She came back from her cancer treatment in early 2025 and did not ease herself back in gently. She came back at full capacity and took on a load that told everybody watching how seriously she understood her role. She sits in strategy meetings now that would not have included a Princess of Wales 10 years ago. William trusts her judgment above anyone else's, and that trust is visible to the people who work in those buildings in the way that real institutional power always becomes visible eventually. So when Tom Parker Bowles made a comment about Catherine at that dinner, he was not making a comment about a decorative royal presence. He was making a comment about the woman who sits at the center of the future of this monarchy, alongside the man who is going to run it. And William knew exactly what he was hearing when he heard it. Now, I want to take you to the comment carefully, because the way these things work in rooms like that is never the way they look from outside. Nobody stands up and delivers a prepared insult. Nobody chooses a moment and announces themselves. It does not work like that. What happens is subtler, and in some ways more revealing, precisely because of that. The evening had been running for a while. The particular looseness of a private dinner where the wine has been present for long enough that the caution people carry into those rooms has softened at the edges. Not drunk, not indiscreet in any obvious way. Just the gradual unwinding of the formal self that happens when the occasion is small enough and familiar enough that people begin to speak more like themselves than like the versions of themselves they bring to public rooms. Tom was talking the way Tom talks, which is confidently and with the particular fluency of a man who has spent his career being good at the social performance of a meal. He is genuinely entertaining in that setting, and the people who have sat across tables from him will tell you that. The problem is not that he is unpleasant company. The problem is that the confidence and the fluency together produce a man who occasionally says the thing that should not be said with exactly the same ease as everything else. And by the time the room has registered what just happened, it is already out. What he said was about Catherine. The precise wording has been described differently by different people who were present, which is what happens when a room full of people absorbs a shock and then reconstructs it afterwards from separate angles. But the substance of it is consistent across every account. The comment was about Catherine's background, where she came from before William, the family she was born into rather than the one she married into, and it was delivered in a register that made it land as diminishment, as a reminder of a distinction that no one in that room had any business drawing, and that Tom Parker Bowles, of all people, had absolutely no standing to make. Think about what that means for a second, because the irony sitting inside that comment is almost architectural. This is a man whose mother spent 30 years as the woman the institution would not officially acknowledge, a woman who was treated for years as somebody who did not quite belong in those rooms regardless of how long she had been in them. Camilla Parker Bowles knows better than almost anyone alive what it costs to be measured by where you come from, rather than by who you are. And her son sat at a royal dinner table and measured Catherine by exactly that standard. Whether he intended the full weight of what he said is a question nobody in that room has been willing to answer on the record. What they have all been willing to confirm is the weight of the silence that followed it. William heard it. That is the first thing you need to understand about what happened next. He heard every word. The particular quality of attention that man brings to a room means that very little passes through it without registering somewhere behind those eyes. He was trained in it. Years of military service, years of public life, years of learning to read rooms full of people with competing agendas and incompatible loyalties. He hears things, and he heard this. The silence came first. That is what the people who were there keep coming back to when they describe the moment. Not an eruption, not the scraping of a chair or a raised voice or anything that you could point at and call a scene. A silence. The kind that falls over a room when something has been said that cannot be unsaid, and everybody present has simultaneously understood it. William put down whatever he was holding. Sources close to the evening described the deliberateness of it. The thing placed down carefully rather than set aside. And then he looked at Tom. Not the look people arrange for photographs. Not the neutral, pleasant expression that senior royals learn to produce so early in their lives that it becomes almost involuntary. The other look, the one the people who know him describe as the moment you understand that something has been decided. He did not shout. William does not shout. If you have paid any attention to how this man operates across the last 20 years, you will know that the shouting version of William is not the version that produces consequences. It is the quiet version that does it. The controlled, precise, absolutely cold version that arrives after the silence and says the minimum number of words necessary to communicate everything. What he said to Tom was not a speech. It was not a long rebuttal or an explanation of why the comment was unacceptable. It was short. The witnesses describe it as short in the specific way that certain sentences are short because they do not need to be anything else. He told Tom that what he had said was not something that belonged in that room, that Catherine was not a subject for that kind of remark, and that he expected it not to happen again. 5 seconds, maybe less. And then he moved on, which is the part that is somehow harder to sit with than the confrontation itself, because moving on is not forgiveness. Moving on in that context is a signal. It is a man saying that he has registered the thing that was said and that it will be dealt with, and that the dealing with it will happen in his own time, in his own way, and that the dinner is not the venue for it. Tom Parker Bowles sat with that. The room sat with it, and Camilla, who was present, sat with it in the particular way that a mother sits, with watching her son be corrected in front of a table full of people who will all remember it. Now here's the part that matters underneath the dinner itself, because if you only read this as a social incident, a comment made and a rebuke delivered, you miss the wound that William was actually reacting from. And that wound is older than anything that happened at that table. William has watched women he loves be diminished by men in that circle his entire adult life. He watched it happen to his mother with a clarity that most children are protected from, because Diana made a choice to be honest with her sons about what was being done to her and why. He knew about the affair. He knew about the 3 people in the marriage. He sat with the knowledge of what his father's relationship with Camilla had cost his mother in terms of dignity and protection and basic decency, and he carried that knowledge forward into every room he has ever walked into since. And then Camilla came into those rooms, and with Camilla came Tom. And William has watched that family move through the spaces his mother once occupied with a comfort that he has never once fully made peace with. He is too disciplined to show it most of the time, too aware of what the institution requires of him, and too committed to functioning inside it to let the personal grief interfere with the public performance. But it is there. The people around him know it is there. And they know that on the subject of Catherine specifically, the sensitivity runs deeper than anything else. Because Catherine is not simply his wife, in the sense that a love story produces a spouse. She is the person he chose, the person he built a life with on his own terms, rather than on the institution's terms. The person he has protected with a ferocity that the public only sees the outline of because the full version of it happens behind doors. The press never gets through. When he fought for years to keep their children out of the papers, when he shut down intrusions before they could become stories, when he sat beside her through illness with the face of a man who has already learned what it costs to lose someone and was not going to watch it happen again. So when Tom Parker Bowles sat across the table and made a comment that diminished Catherine by her origins, he was not making a comment about a princess. He was making a comment about the woman William has spent 20 years choosing every single day, and he was doing it with the casual confidence of a man whose mother's position at that table came at a cost that William has never stopped paying. That is the wound underneath the silence. And that is why what William did next was not an overreaction from a man with a short temper. It was the controlled response of a man who has been filing things away for a very long time and who knows precisely when to move and precisely how far. And then Anne heard about it. Princess Anne did not hear about it at the dinner. She was not present that evening, which is its own kind of detail because Anne's absence from certain private occasions is never exactly accidental. But she heard about it the following morning, and the way she heard about it is the way Anne hears most things that matter inside that family, which is through the small, quiet network of people who have spent decades understanding that she is the one in that building whose reaction to information is most worth managing carefully. Somebody told her, and Anne listened to the whole account without interrupting, which is something she does that people who do not know her well mistake for patience. It is not patience. It is the particular stillness of a woman assembling a picture in full before she decides what to do with it. Now you need to understand something about Anne and Tom Parker Bowles that most of the coverage of this incident has not touched, because their connection runs through Camilla, and Camilla runs through a history that Anne has been carrying since 1973. The year Andrew Parker Bowles, Tom's father, married Camilla instead of Anne. The year Anne sat in a church, in a hat with photographers outside, and watched the man she had been discussing marriage with stand at an altar with someone else because the institution had told her she was not permitted to be the one standing beside him. Tom Parker Bowles is Andrew Parker Bowles' son. When Anne looks at Tom, she is not simply looking at Camilla's child. She is looking at a man who carries the specific DNA of a history that cost her something the institution never acknowledged and never compensated her for. She has never said that in public. She has never said it anywhere that a microphone could find. But the people who know Anne understand that she carries it, and that she has always carried it, and that the carrying of it informs every interaction she has ever had with that entire family. So when she heard what Tom had said about Catherine at that dinner, she was not hearing it as an isolated incident. She was hearing it as the latest installment of something that started before Catherine was born, a pattern of behavior from that family that involves moving through rooms they have no real right to, and saying things they have no real standing to say. And Anne's response to that pattern has never been to raise her voice. It has always been to make the next move. She found Tom the following morning, not in a formal setting, not with an appointment or a household member present or any of the institutional scaffolding that turns a conversation into a record. She found him in the particular way Anne finds people when she has decided they need to hear something, which is in a corridor or a room where the exit is clear, but the conversation is not. And she spoke to him. Nobody has the exact words. The people who have described the exchange are consistent about the length of it, which was short, and the register of it, which was the specific register Anne uses when she has decided that a situation requires a certain kind of clarity. She told him something about the difference between being in those rooms and belonging in them. Something about the fact that the comment he had made at dinner said rather more about his own position than he had perhaps intended, and something that circled back, in language that only the people who knew the history would fully understand, to the question of what exactly his family had contributed to those rooms versus what they had taken from them. Tom Parker Bowles left that conversation looking like a man who had walked into something he had not expected and come out the other side in worse shape than when he went in. The staff who saw him afterwards have described it the same way. Not broken, not in pieces, just smaller. In the specific way that a person gets smaller when they have been told the truth about themselves by someone who has been waiting a very long time to say it, and does not raise her voice doing it. When Camilla found out what Anne had said, her first move was the one she always makes, which was toward Charles. Understand what that reflex costs her now compared to what it used to cost her. There was a time when Charles was the person who could fix things, when his authority and his willingness to deploy it on her behalf was the shield she could put herself behind and trust that it would hold. Those days have been eroding for a while. His illness has changed the arithmetic of power inside that household in ways that no official statement has ever acknowledged, but that every senior person on the payroll has adjusted their behavior around. William absorbs more. William decides more. And Charles, who loves his wife and would move the world for her in the abstract, has found himself repeatedly in the position of a man who wants to act and discovers that the ground he used to stand on is no longer entirely his. She went to him anyway, because that is the move. And it has always been the move, and she does not yet have a different one. She told him what Anne had said to Tom. She told him that Anne had overstepped, that what Tom had said at dinner, whatever it was, did not warrant being spoken to in that manner by a woman who had no business appointing herself the moral authority of the household. She told Charles that he needed to say something to Anne, to William, to whoever it was going to take to establish that her son was not going to be treated that way. Charles listened. He is good at listening in the way that people who cannot fix things sometimes retreat into the performance of hearing them. And when she finished, he asked her a question that she was not expecting. He asked her what Tom had said. Not in the confrontational way, not as a challenge. In the quiet way that a man asks a question when he already suspects the answer is going to make the conversation harder, and he is asking anyway because he has decided that knowing the truth is more important than avoiding the discomfort of it, Camilla told him. And Charles went quiet in the way that Charles goes quiet when he is processing something he would rather not have to process. Because whatever his feelings about his wife and his commitment to her, he is not a man who can hear that his stepson sat at a dinner table and made a comment about Catherine's background and conclude that Anne overstepped by responding to it. He is not built that way. Whatever else he is and whatever choices he made across the long, painful arc of his personal life, he understands the weight of that kind of comment and what it communicates about the person who makes it. He told Camilla he would speak to Tom. He did not tell her he would speak to Anne. He did not tell her he would speak to William. He told her he would speak to Tom. And Camilla understood the difference immediately, because a conversation with Tom is a private correction. A conversation with Anne or with William is an acknowledgement that Tom was wrong, and Charles had just communicated his verdict without saying the word. She left that conversation knowing she had gone in looking for a weapon and come out holding nothing. Now let me tell you what Catherine did, because the way she handled the days after that dinner tells you as much about who she is and where she stands now as anything else in this story. She said nothing publicly. That is the first thing, and in some ways the most important thing. There was no statement, no carefully worded comment passed through an aide, no signal sent through the usual channels that the palace uses when it wants to communicate something without appearing to communicate anything. She gave the press nothing to work with because she had decided, as she appears to decide most things now, that the situation did not require her to fill the silence with anything. But the silence was not absence. The people who were in that household in the days after the dinner have been consistent about one thing, which is that Catherine's manner in those rooms was completely steady, not cold, not performing. Steady in the specific way of someone who has made a decision and is not reconsidering it. She went to her engagements. She did her work. She sat in the meetings that she has been sitting in with an increasing regularity that tells you everything about where her actual position in that institution now sits. And she did one thing that was not announced and was not reported at the time, but that the people who were present have not forgotten. A few days after the dinner, at a private gathering that did not make any diary, she sat next to Tom Parker Bowles for approximately 40 minutes. Not by accident, and not because a seating plan required it. By choice. And she was perfectly pleasant to him for the entirety of those 40 minutes in the specific way that Catherine is pleasant when she has decided that pleasantness is the most precise instrument available for a particular job. She did not reference the dinner. She did not reference the comment. She asked about his work. She listened to the answers. She was, by every account, exactly what she always is in public, which is warm and attentive and completely impossible to read in any way that gives you something to use. Tom Parker Bowles left that conversation in a visibly different state than he entered it. Not because she said anything cutting, because she said nothing cutting, because she treated him with the full and complete dignity of a woman who does not need to point at the wound to make the point. He knew what he had said. She knew what he had said. And she had just shown him, in the most efficient way available, exactly how much power she had decided to give it, which was none at all. That is what nearly 2 decades of learning how that institution works produces in a person. Not bitterness, not performance. The absolute economy of a woman who knows that silence and steadiness in the right combination say more than any confrontation ever could. Now let me tell you about the consequences, because they did not arrive in the way that public consequences arrive, with announcements and explanations, and something you could put your finger on in a newspaper. They arrive the way consequences always arrive in that world, which is quietly and without attribution, and in the shape of things that stop happening rather than things that are announced. Tom Parker Bowles has a relationship with that household that was built on proximity and on the access that Camilla's position made possible. He is present at private gatherings. He is included in the informal occasions that sit below the level of the official diary. He is the kind of person who gets the call when there is something happening that is not on the record. That access is not a right. It has never been a right. It is a function of relationships and of the trust that relationships inside that world require to stay intact. By the spring, the calls were coming less frequently. The invitations to the private occasions were arriving later than they used to, which in the language of that household is its own kind of message. You do not get told you are no longer welcome. You get told later and later until the gap between the telling and the occasion makes attending almost impossible, and eventually the gap becomes the answer. 3 private events that Tom had attended in each of the 2 previous years did not include him in their guest lists. No explanation was offered, and none was requested because the people who move through those rooms understand that requesting an explanation is the confirmation you were hoping not to need. His access to William's household specifically has narrowed in a way that 2 separate sources have described using almost identical language. The door, they said, is not closed. It is just not as open as it was. And in a world built on gradations of access, that distinction is the difference between being inside the circle and standing at the edge of it. Camilla has been watching this happen, and the watching of it is its own kind of cost for her, because there is nothing she can do that does not make it worse. Going to William makes her look like she is asking him to overlook something she privately knows he has every right not to overlook. Going to Catherine is not an option she appears to have seriously considered, which tells you something about how she reads the relative positions of those 2 women right now. Going to Charles produces the kind of conversation they had once already, which ended with him telling her he would speak to Tom. She is, in the particular way that powerful women trapped in impossible positions become stuck, waiting. Watching the circle close around her son by degrees too small to protest and too consistent to pretend are not deliberate. Here's what that dinner actually revealed. And I want to be precise about this because the easy read of this story is that it is about a rude comment and a justified reaction. That is part of it, but it is the smallest part. What that dinner revealed is the current map of power inside this family. And it is not the map that the official titles and the official positions would suggest. William and Catherine sit at the center of the future of this institution, and everybody in those buildings has understood that for long enough now that their behavior reflects it in every small decision they make. The invitations that go out and the ones that do not. The conversations that include certain people and the ones that route around them, the access that stays consistent, and the access that quietly narrows. Tom Parker Bowles made a mistake that night at dinner. He made the specific mistake of a man who had been in those rooms long enough to forget that being in the room is not the same as owning it. He confused his proximity to the institution with a standing inside it that he was never actually given, and that nobody who matters in that building was ever going to let him simply claim. And William's response, and Anne's response, and Catherine's response, each in their completely different register, each arriving from a completely different angle, produced together the clearest picture that household has shown in years of what it actually looks like when the future runs the room. Camilla spent decades earning her way into those spaces. She built something she did not believe was possible, and she built it on patience and discipline and the willingness to absorb whatever the country needed to throw at her until it got tired of throwing. That is a genuine achievement, and I have no interest in erasing it. But her son sat at one of those tables and forgot himself. And in forgetting himself, he reminded everybody in that room of something that has been true for a while now, and that the dinner only made visible. The rooms belong to William and Catherine. They have belonged to them for some time, and the people who have not yet adjusted their behavior to reflect that reality are discovering, one quiet consequence at a time, exactly what the cost of that miscalculation looks like. Tom Parker Bowles did not lose his name that evening. He did not lose his mother's affection or his public profile or his seat at the table of British food writing. What he lost is harder to quantify and harder to recover than any of those things. He lost the sense, inside the rooms that matter to him, that he was someone whose presence was assumed rather than negotiated. He lost the casual belonging that had been the real inheritance of his mother's position. And he lost it because he opened his mouth at a dinner and said something about a woman he had no standing to comment on, in a room with a man who has spent 25 years quietly building a world where that kind of thing does not go unanswered. William was 15 years old when he walked behind his mother's coffin through the streets of London. He learned in the years that followed exactly what it costs when the people who are supposed to protect the women around them decide instead to look the other way. He has never forgotten it. He has never been going to forget it. And when Tom Parker Bowles looked up from that dinner table and met the silence that followed his comment, he was meeting something that had been building since 1997. Not rage, not drama. The absolute, immovable certainty of a man who decided a very long time ago that on this particular subject, in this particular household, there are lines that do not get crossed, and that if they do, there is a cost, and the cost is patient, and the cost is permanent, and it does not need to raise its voice to collect.